welcome to our annual College Info Night. We're very happy that you've joined us, even though this is certainly different than the way we typically present. I'm both much less nervous and also much more nervous because I can't see any of you, so I don't know if my jokes will land. But we are here and we'll be recording this as well so that folks who couldn't attend can watch it at a later date. So at AMSA, well, I guess first I should introduce myself. My name is Kate Driver. I'm the Director of School Counseling at AMSA. Two of my colleagues are here tonight. If they would like to unmute and introduce themselves, they can do that.
Hi, my name is Mindy Pop, and I'm the long-term substitute school counselor filling in this fall for Ms. Hampton. I work with juniors and seniors with the last name A through H, and welcome to all of you tonight.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Morrissey. I have last names L through Z for the junior class. I've been in AMSA for a number of years now. Really happy. Same with Ms. Driver, a little bit nervous. This is kind of awkward and we're getting used to it, but it's still, I'm used to pacing when I present. So I don't know, this doing it sitting down is going to be an interesting feat for me. I'll be fidgeting, I think. But welcome. We're really excited to share information with you tonight.
So a couple of housekeeping things. I don't think you have a chat function tonight, but we do have a Q&A function. So if you click on Q&A, you can enter any questions that you have there as we go. We will also have a chance that you can, there's I believe a raise your hand button, and you can raise your hand and then we'll call on you. You can unmute yourself. So the person who's presenting will not be monitoring the Q&A or the raise your hand function. So we'll pause at a couple different places throughout the presentation to answer questions on the section we've just presented. And then we'll also have a little bit of time for other questions at the end. And we have the questions that you all may have submitted before this event as well. So hopefully we will be able to give you a nice thorough overview of what you can expect as much as we know right now for the next year. So I think with that, we will get started. If does that sound good to my co-presenters? Was that okay? Cool. All right. So the college counseling mission at AMSA, we are really invested in helping all students apply to identify, apply, and matriculate to colleges that fit their interests, abilities, and goals. We really do truly value the relationship between students and counselors, and I think that nothing has highlighted this more than our current situation. Every day that I get to go to school and be in the building is wonderful, and it's almost like we have a lot of the harder parts of school without as many of the fun parts, and interacting with students is really one of the fun parts. So we really look forward to video chatting a lot with your students this spring and getting to know them much better so that we can help them in their post-secondary planning process. So tonight we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to start off and talk about the planning and research for the college application process. Then we're going to go over what is an actual application for those of you who have not been through this process before or need a little refresher. And then we have some tips on navigating the process that we'll finish with. Future events, every spring, typically May, we do an application process and admission panel evening. We did do that this past year during the pandemic. We recorded a video and then we had a coffee. So we will definitely find some way to deliver that information to you, regardless of what's happening in the world. Maybe we'll be in person, maybe we'll be online, but we will have an event. And then we also publicize MIFA webinars. There will be webinars in the fall of 2021. There's also a series of webinars this year for folks who want to begin learning about the financial aid process. And so we'll continue to send out that information through Naviance to you. There were a couple of other web series that we liked this year that we shared, particularly with our senior families, as there were a couple of different groups that are putting out awesome, really up-to-the-minute information. So as we get resources like that, we'll continue to share them with you as well, because we know that there's going to be a lot that continues to change and evolve over the next few months. So we wanted to start out by at least addressing some of the things that we've seen this fall about how COVID has changed this admission cycle. Now, this isn't to say that all of these things will necessarily impact your students, or won't necessarily know exactly how they will impact your students yet, but this is some of what we've seen this fall. So we've definitely seen, and we know there will continue to be, more test optional schools. So more colleges and universities that do not require the SAT or the ACT for admission. There has always been a list of schools, and even some very competitive schools that are test optional. But because of the difficulty in getting the SAT and the ACT scheduled this year, I would say even 95 or more % of schools went test optional. Some schools have already announced their test optional status for next year. Other schools haven't yet, and they're kind of waiting to see what happens for these juniors in testing. So we will continue to have more on that for you. There's definitely an emphasis on holistic review in many schools. So because some schools have not had test scores, they've had to look at different types of information than what they've usually looked at. So we've seen a greater emphasis on either high school grades or counselor recs or teacher recs or student essays. So it really depends on the school, but we've seen much more of a holistic review as opposed to a review that's really GPA and test score for some schools that used to do that. More online events, definitely more flexibility around deadlines. Colleges are definitely more open-minded and flexible than they've ever been in general. We've seen colleges have to figure out how to pivot, just as we have, to meet the needs of their students, both their current students and also the students who are applying this past year. We've also seen a higher demand for financial aid, which means that we definitely have really encouraged families to submit forms in a timely fashion, because there is much more demand, because the pandemic has made a difference for a lot of people financially. So with that, it's also never too early to start looking for scholarships, and we have some resources that we can share with you about that. And overall, just there's so many more options to interact online with schools than there have ever been. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those later, I believe, but definitely some great opportunities that we really hope students will take advantage of. So a very, very, very general timeline. We would like to see our students spend the spring of their junior year considering to research and get to know themselves and think about what it is that they want to be doing and what they want to study and where they want to study during the spring of their junior year. We recommend that they take the SAT or ACT in spring 2021 if it's possible and if it's offered. We don't really know much more about that right now. We know that some schools are offering some in-person testing for their students. We will look into that, but there's, as you know, there's a lot of questions about our HVAC system and whether or not and how we'll do that. So we are hoping to pilot the PSAT for you all in January, I believe January 26th. So we'll know more about how all that works. We see students applying fall and winter of their senior year. So typically between October 15th and November 1st are our earliest deadlines. We see students that continue to apply through February 1st-ish. That's typically kind of the window. And then students make decisions and have to deposit during May of their senior year. So where to begin with planning and research? Anything I should pause for yet? Am I good?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, awesome. So we recommend, there we go. We recommend that students start thinking about what they want in school. There are 3,000, I think, maybe even more, colleges and universities in the US alone. And so how do you make that giant list get a fair amount smaller pretty quickly? We encourage students to think about location, geographic location, but also proximity to things that they want to be doing. If you love to ski, you probably want to be within a reasonable distance that you can continue to ski. If you feel like you want to be in a city or somewhere more rural. So there are lots of questions around location that are beyond just what state do you want to live in? Large university versus a small college. There's a college in Vermont that has about 200 kids. A small college, though, is typically around 1,500 to 2,000 students, with entering classes of 500 to 600. So that's considered a small college. And then large universities can be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 students. That's a very, very different experience. We encourage students to think about whether they think that they would be successful in a large lecture, or if they really need small classes of 20 to 25. That can make a really big difference. Student organizations, what kinds of co-curricular activities are they interested in? Do they want to play intercollegiate athletics? And then a big piece of the college search process, and perhaps more than even in a typical year, is affordability, and beginning to look at what your family may or may not qualify for and may or may not need in terms of money for college. Is really important to do that on the front end, as opposed to maybe 15 or 20 years ago it was apply anywhere you want and then we'll compare. But I think at this point it's really smart to begin to look at what you can afford on this side. And then your academic fit. Do they have your major? Are there programs that you're really interested in? Is the school good at the thing that you're looking to do? So those are some questions to begin to ask to narrow things down. Unwise reasons to add a school to your list. You think we might be joking, but we actually do see students who decide they want to go to a school where their significant other goes, or where all of their friends are applying, or because of the name of the school. They know that school has a good name. And I think we all could probably name some of those places. We also don't necessarily want students to add a school just because the acceptance rate is high. We think that you can apply to a place like that if you're actually interested in the school, but just trying to sort of pad your rate and say like, oh, well, I got into 20 colleges. Like, that's not really as important as finding places that really fit you. So this slide comes with a huge caveat. We have no idea right now whether or not in-person visits are really going to be possible for all of you this spring. We really hope so. If they are, there's a college visit form that you have to bring to the school. You get it signed. You get 4 excused days in 11th and 12th grade. We suggest, again, if you have this option to visit when students are on campus, you should go to the college's website and schedule a tour, check in with admissions. You can often sit in on classes or go to lunch with students. We also suggest that you revisit schools after your acceptances have been received, so that you can go back with perhaps clearer eyes once you've done more of the search process. You can also check in with, especially in this pandemic time, you can check in with campus safety, and if you're allowed, you could give yourself a self-guided tour. We've also had some families this year that actually just did kind of driving tours of some of those schools that they were interested in. We do recommend that you check in with campus safety and don't just show up. But it is possible to go and walk around the campus, mask up, to do what they're asking you to do. It's also great to ask the admissions office for a list of local hotels and inns that offer discounts. There are lots of places that will offer you discounts if you're visiting a college in their area. So definitely worth asking at the admissions office, and or ask at the hotel you're considering if they give any discounts for folks who are in colleges. It's a great way to save some money, especially if you're doing kind of a big trip and you have a few places that you're going to hit. So other opportunities that you can take advantage of, and students can take advantage of these, in a typical year, but especially this year. We've seen a lot of schools doing online information sessions. They're relatively general, but they're a great place to start. There are often online open houses, college fairs. The online college fairs have been really awesome. It's a great way to see a bunch of schools relatively quickly and begin to get familiar with what's out there. We also recommend, a lot of schools are doing student panels of their current students. So you might be able to learn about student life at X college and university. So that's a great way to hear more about what's happening there. There are meet the faculty opportunities at some schools. There are plenty of online, like 360 virtual tours. And I think we've also seen more connection with individual admissions officers than before. So admissions officers are really trying to reach out and find ways to make sure that they're making connections with students, so that students know enough about their school to make solid decisions about where they're going to go. So we definitely recommend all of these opportunities. We also have schools that visit AMSA, and we had remote visits this past year. They happened on Mondays during academic workshops. And students could attend during academic workshop if they had permission from their teacher, lunchtime, break time. So it was never interrupting any classes. We're hoping to maybe have some spring college visits of that fashion as well. So while you're evaluating colleges, again, this is sort of if you can get on campus or if you're going to try to find some virtual ways to engage with the college or university that you're considering. Pay attention to how you feel on the campus. Speak to current students. Try to keep an open mind. There can be things about a college visit that are kind of a turnoff. Like you went to a school and it was really rainy that day, but in fact, that school on a sunny day might have been a place that you loved. So try to keep an open mind. Meet with a faculty member in your program if you can, or again, if there are online opportunities to do that. See if you can sit in on a class. That's still something you can ask for. And we also recommend that if you are on campus, just spend some time off the tour if you do have the opportunity to go and sit in the student center. But that's a really great way to just kind of see what's going on. But again, that may be a little bit more difficult this year. Oh, I already touched on this a little bit, but we do always have college visits that visit AMSA. We had over 100 virtual visits this year in the fall, and we will hopefully have some in the spring. We strongly encourage students to attend these events. It's often the admissions representative that will eventually review applicants from AMSA that comes to those visits. So it's a really great way to make a positive and lasting impression on an admissions officer who might eventually be deciding whether or not you get into the school. So connecting with them is really important. Some schools do actually track what they call demonstrated interest, which is how much you have interacted with the school. Now, that doesn't mean you should just randomly interact with them, but ask thoughtful questions. Write a very nice email that has a salutation and some thoughtful questions, and then a nice sign off. Making a positive impression is really important. When you're building your college list, staying organized is really, really, really important. We believe that your list should contain schools that are safety schools where your qualifications are above that of the average admitted student, and or you believe that you can afford or that you have a chance of getting good aid at that school if you are in need of financial aid. Target schools where your scores or your stats are sort of at where the average admitted student is, and then some reach schools. Reach schools sort of fall into two categories. Number one, if your qualifications are at their average qualification, but their admit rate is really low. So say, their average admitted GPA is a 4.0, you have a 4.0, but they only take 10% of their students. That's still a reach. Or a reach would be if it's not necessarily a super competitive school, but your qualifications are slightly below that of the average admitted student. So that's really how we'd like to see you organizing your list, or your students organizing your list. And your list should be your list, which fits your needs. We don't want to see, again, students feeling like they should apply to a certain type of school just because their friends are applying or they think it's a good school. We really want them to be strategic and choose places that really fit them. We know that having a school that fits your likes, your dislikes, your wants, your needs really helps predict success in college. So how do you figure out what's a safety school, what's a reach school? A couple of different things that you can use. The GPA, your GPA, the difficulty of the program that you're applying to, if you're applying to a specific program within a college or university. The acceptance rate, again, even if you're, if it's a really hard school to get into, they have a low acceptance rate. Even if your stats are awesome, it's still a reach. The rigor of your secondary school transcript. So that means sort of, well, it means your grades and the classes that you took, but the classes you took in context of your school. So what did you have available to you and what did you take advantage of, right? So that's the rigor of your transcript. And then lastly, your test scores, if they exist. Again, I think that's all going to be a little bit of a moving target for a while for everybody. But you could certainly use like your PSAT scores and from last year, and eventually, hopefully, your PSAT scores from this year, and SAT scores from prior years. If again, just trying to get a ballpark to figure out where those schools should fall in your list. So a couple of tools that students can use to build their list and to do research on schools. We have a program called, or a website called Naviance that we use extensively with our juniors and seniors. And I think hopefully you all got an email this afternoon with an activation code for a parent account that's a view-only version of your student's account. There is something called College Supermatch, which is a great search engine where you put in criteria that you want, and it gives you a list of schools that meet your criteria. We also have scattergrams that have all of the historic information of AMSA applicants to different colleges. So you can look at how the AMSA kid's done, what was their profile like. One caveat to those scattergrams, it's still really important to look at the general admission rates and stats for all the schools that you're considering. The AMSA data, it is from, some of it is from, 10 years ago. And the college admissions game has really changed in that time. Schools are more and more competitive every year. And so you won't be able to see like, oh, well, a bunch of these kids got in 10 years ago to that school. So it's important to be looking at current information from other sources as well. The College Board also has a really great search engine that I really like. So that's wonderful. There is the New England Board of Higher Education's tuition rate program for Mass residents. So if your student really wants to major in a program that's not available within the Massachusetts state system, you can get a tuition deal to an out-of-state college in the New England area. I'm writing on my to-do list to send that information to all of you tomorrow or later this week. With some other links so that you have that information if that's something you're curious about. And then every college or university is required by law to have a net price calculator on their website. Some of them are buried, some of them are better than others, but it can be a helpful jumping off point to figure out, am I going to have to pay the sticker price? What might I get in terms of financial aid at this school? Because it's very helpful to just begin to think about that. It's not a guarantee, but it can give you a ballpark. So we definitely recommend taking a look at those. So when we're talking about college and money, let's see. Okay. So the government, you're going to fill out a bunch of forms, and the government or a college is going to decide based on the information that you provide to them, what kind of money the school thinks that you need for college. Again, that's what the government and or the college thinks that you need, not necessarily what you actually may need. But they have formulas that they use and forms, and then they give you different financial aid offers that are based on that information. So some students will qualify for need-based aid. That means that based on their family income, the number of people in their family, the number of people in college, they benefit for some grants that are based purely on their financial need. So some of you will qualify for that kind of money. Other students, and perhaps some students who qualify for need-based aid, might also qualify for merit-based aid. Merit-based aid is money that is awarded to you by a college based on a characteristic. So there might be a music scholarship. There might be an award that they give for a certain GPA or a certain test score, again, in normal year. So it's awarded to you based purely on a characteristic about you or something that you've done, something you've achieved, not based on your financial situation. We also know there are public schools and there are private schools. So there's a Massachusetts state system that all of you lovely taxpayers have been supporting over the years. There's a community college system, a state college system, and then a university system. We know a lot of students end up going to UMass system schools because they end up being the most solid financial deal. There are also many private colleges around the country. Some of them offer a lot of aid, some of them not so much. But we would definitely encourage you to not necessarily make a choice about public or private until you've looked into the financial part of it a little bit to figure out what you might qualify for. Very few students at private schools pay the full sticker price. So you might actually be surprised by what you're offered if you fall in love with a place that's a private school. But again, use the calculation, the tools. Okay, so one of the things that we try to help students think about, and we encourage you to think about, is basically your finances and your students' achievement. And there are places for everyone. So kind of broke this into 4 quadrants. If you are a student who is over here in this high need, high achievement, there are schools that will give you 100% of your, that will award you in financial aid 100% of your demonstrated need. Again, what the government thinks you need, what the school thinks you need. So looking at those schools that offer need-based aid, schools that offer merit-based aid, and then considering the state institutions because there are some great deals for high-achieving students there. If you are a student who has a very high financial need but hasn't necessarily done super well in school, you might find yourself well served by looking at community colleges and our state college system. It's not to say that there aren't private colleges then that might be interested in offering you some money, but it would make it difficult for you to get some of the merit money, or might. So again, it's really worth looking at all your options if you fall into that category. For students who are they don't necessarily qualify for a lot of money, they haven't necessarily done that well in high school, again, we would encourage them to look at community colleges, private colleges with a medium to high acceptance rate, or colleges within the state college system. And then lastly, over here, some of our low need folks who are high achieving, look at schools that offer merit money, and again, our state institutions. So I say this with absolutely no judgment. I think all of your students are great. I think some students know how to do well in high school and do great, and other students haven't quite figured it out yet. And it doesn't mean that they're not going to go on to do wonderful, wonderful things. We want everybody to know that regardless of your income or your achievement in high school, there is a path for you to go to college if you want to. There is an option for everybody. So this is something that your counselor can definitely talk more with you about individually as a student, about where you fall. You know, it breaks my heart when we have students who are high achieving and low need and apply mostly to private schools that don't offer merit-based aid and only offer need-based aid. They just don't qualify for it, and then they don't necessarily have as many options. So, you know, please feel free to communicate with your counselors about your needs in terms of financial aid, but also types of schools you're considering. All right, so I think I will pause there for questions. Perhaps there have been some. Perhaps there have not been.
There was only 2, and I did answer both questions within the chat, just having to do with rep visits to AMSA. One of the questions was talking about visits in this potentially in the springtime. That isn't a typical thing that we've seen in years past. Traditionally, colleges visit high schools in the fall and then do both college fairs in the spring and in the fall. So it would be relatively new. We have seen a handful of schools that have visited in the spring, but it's a relatively new thing. So I think as we are in this virtual world, we may see more of those for this upcoming spring. But we do post everything in Naviance, and we do send out emails just notifying students of who's coming in the upcoming weeks. And the reps have the availability to actually schedule right into Naviance. So there's less of the coordinating on our part for those rep visits, and they can go in and schedule a time to meet with our students.
Cool. I see a couple other questions. When do we recalculate GPAs to reflect this year's grades? We typically do that at the mid-year for juniors. We don't report, I don't know that we typically, I can't remember, Sarah, I don't know that we updated transcripts with them, because technically we only report at the end of the year, but I believe we updated them so that students could see them in Naviance to use them.
Yes, but we didn't put them on the transcript until the end of the year, correct?
Right, because that is our policy, that we post them to transcript at the end of every school year. With the exception of senior year, we recalculate GPA at the mid-year. But we decided a couple of years ago to recalculate GPA at the mid-year for juniors, and then post them just to Naviance so that students could use them. So hopefully that helps. Does Naviance or College Board include international schools in their database? Yes. College Board has more. If you have specific places that you're interested in, I would actually recommend that you email me directly. I'm k.driver@amsax.org. I've done a bunch of international admissions, and because I worked internationally for a little while. I don't know if either of our other counselors would like to speak about international schools at all, but there are a couple of different sites that we would suggest you use if you're considering the UK. I'm particularly versed in the Netherlands, and a couple other places. So we can help a little bit with that if you're looking internationally. Then I think we will be talking about some of these
Ms. Driver, can I just say one thing about international schools? So in addition to the different websites that Ms. Driver alluded to, especially for the United Kingdom, also for Canadian schools, it's important to keep in mind that colleges abroad often have different admission and acceptance timelines than we do in the United States. So you just want to make sure you're aware of those early on. Their applications can look a little bit different. Same criteria often insofar as an application and an essay and standardized test scores, but their deadlines can look very different than those in the United States. So just to put that on your radar. Yeah, thank you. There's another question on here about what about low need medium achievement students? I think it would depend on what you mean when you say medium achievement. But again, I think there are definitely some private colleges who often give some decent merit money to students who have gone to AMSA and done pretty well. A's, B's, maybe a C once in a while, because the rigor of the AMSA course load is high. So again, we'd be happy to talk individually with kids about their choices and help them find some schools that would really meet all their needs. We will talk a little more about some of these other questions as we go. I don't necessarily have a recommended list of colleges for a finance major. If any of the counselors would like to chime in, we certainly have some lists. There are a lot of resources that we can use to help a student figure that out. Anybody else want to chime in on that? I'm going to get a visual aid. Just one moment. I love it. Visual aid. Hold on one second. Yeah. We'll answer another question while we wait for the visual aid on that one. We are not going to spend a lot of time on gap year programs and college deferral now, but we will talk about that at our May meeting. All right. Okay, I'm ready. So this is my impromptu visual aid. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Ruggs Recommendations on the Colleges. This is a soft cover book. It currently comes in PDF copies, and what's fabulous about Ruggs Recommendations is that it gives you just what this parent asked. Is there a list of recommended schools for specific majors, such as finance? And I think Ruggs Recommendations for the colleges, yes, Ruggs Recommendations on the colleges is a really good place to start. So
awesome. Awesome. And I have a guide. I have that guide as well too. It's wonderful. So that's something that we can use with your kids when they meet with us. Okay, cool. And then lastly is our chart that shows schools where AMSA alum have attended and which are categorized by low, mid, high achievement, etc. No, but if you looked at the scattergrams of individual schools, you can see whether, like, how students did in school and whether or not they were accepted. But we don't track financial information because we don't have access to that. So I couldn't necessarily tell you anecdotally. So yeah, the book, Mr. Foster, is called Ruggs Guide to the Colleges, and I can put that in my big old follow-up email. It's great, and we have copies of it as well.
Ruggs
Okay.
Recommendations on the colleges, Ms. Driver.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we're going to keep going because, again, we will answer a couple of these as we go. Good? All right, and shall I continue? Okay, cool. I'm continuing. I promise you won't have to listen to just me all night. All right, so the piece, like, what actually is a college application? This is one of the most common questions that we get from students, and it's a fantastic one. So there is the application form. The form itself is just, I mean, it's kind of lengthy for many schools, but it can be short as well. So there's the application form. It has kind of the bio demo information. So your name, your address, your birth date, that kind of information. There are a lot of forms that ask information about your parents, that ask about what high school you went to, what courses you took. So there's that general application form. Most students use two main applications and apply to multiple schools. So there's the common application, which I would say is still probably favored, at least by AMSA students, and there's the coalition application. Most schools take one or the other of those, certainly not all. Some take both. So most of our students will complete at least the common application, sometimes coalition app. There are some schools that have their own form. Some of our state colleges still use their own form. There is an application system for the University of California system schools. So there are some exceptions where students would apply directly to the school or to a state and a network of state schools. So there's the application form itself. There's an essay. Not every school has an essay. Many/most do. There are also supplemental essays. So there's often one big college essay and then a few short essays that students might have to write. Sometimes the short essay is something like, in 150 words, tell us about a meaningful extracurricular activity. Some of the supplemental essays are longer though. So we help students get ready to write all of those essays. We recommend that they do them over the summer of their junior year, but we go through all of that with them in the spring. Then we have letters of recommendation. Most students request 1 to 2 letters of recommendation from teachers that they've had relatively recently at AMSA. We'd like to see junior or senior year teachers. That's not a hard and fast rule at this point because we know that remote school kind of disrupted some of the relationship building. So there are some cases where we might have a sophomore teacher for some of our current students or current seniors, possibly some of you as well. Letters of recommendation are typically written and then sent to all the schools that students apply to. Then there's the transcript, which is the classes that students have taken and the grades that they've earned. And then there's the AMSA profile that goes along with this. It gives context of our school. for the colleges and universities. So it tells them all sorts of things about us, and you can actually view it on the AMSA website. I believe it's under the About Us section. It's linked. It's a PDF. It's about 4 pages. So that goes with every application. Sometimes there are test scores. Sometimes there are not. Sometimes there's an interview. Sometimes there is not. So those are the general pieces of an application that students will be working on over the next, basically a year from now. They probably will have applied. Next slide. All right. Testing. I guess the good news is there are more test optional schools. The bad news is we still don't necessarily know what testing is going to look like and what schools have decided for next year. I think a lot of colleges and universities have been, they've been really, really focused on getting through this admission cycle with this crew. And while they're starting to release more information about juniors, and that's becoming more available on their websites, I think some of that is still evolving in some places. So students can take the SAT or the ACT. We believe that students should start testing in the spring of their junior year if COVID makes it possible. We've seen some students have multiple cancellations of testing, but we've seen other students that were able to test. So it certainly is worth trying to find a test site. I think it's good to think about trying to take it at least once, so that if you have a school that requires it, or if your score is decent enough that you have the testing. You may not necessarily get to take it as many times as you might have in a normal situation, but we would definitely recommend trying to get at least one test in the spring. Some schools typically have also required SAT subject tests, but we've seen most of that go away in the pandemic, and I don't think that will necessarily be back in play for your students. I don't think there'll be a requirement, because I think that students are still going to be scrambling to get an SAT or an ACT. So I would prioritize one of those tests over subject tests. But again, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't really guarantee either way. Again, I addressed this right up top. Some schools offered school-based testing this fall for their seniors. We did not. We were really prioritizing trying to get the juniors in for PSAT, and then we had to cancel that. So we will continue to look at our situation in the spring and see if it's something we can offer. We'll also be prioritizing AP testing in the spring, in May. So you'll just have to stay tuned, and I wish I had better information. But again, you guys are used to hearing we don't know yet. So thank you for continuing to put up with that answer. All right, teacher recommendations. Again, I think I covered this a little bit. 2 core academic teachers. We do have some students who ask non-core teachers. They might ask an art teacher or someone else. There are kind of 2 reasons I see that you might ask a non-core academic teacher. Number one, if you're struggling to find someone who you feel like really knows you, you might end up in that boat. Number 2, if you're a student who's applying to study what that person teaches. Otherwise, we do typically like to see core academic teachers, and that's what colleges often expect as well. We recommend that students ask in person or by email in this case. And then they need to fill out a recommendation request form in Naviance. It's something that, again, we'll show them where to find that stuff in Naviance, but it's a questionnaire that students provide some information to the teacher after they've asked, and the teacher said, yes, I'm happy to write for you. The student goes in, fills out the recommendation request form. It asks them about what they learned and what was important. I think it's really helpful for teachers to have that guide, and for the students to reflect on why they're asking a certain teacher. The better that the student, or the more thorough that the student is when filling out that recommendation request form, the better letter we often see. They really focus on the student's academic performance as opposed to their performance outside of the classroom. We really want them to focus on the academics. We do suggest, we strongly suggest that students ask during the spring of grade 11. We did see some folks this year, some teachers who turned some kids down who asked this fall. I think there were a couple of factors that were in play there. I think trying to figure out how to teach remotely, rewriting their curriculum. I think some teachers were at capacity if they'd already said yes to 10 kids and you didn't ask until mid-October for mid-November deadline. They said no. And I think we saw a little more of that than we typically do. Our teachers are very giving of their time. We have teachers who write 25 recommendations, which is a ton for a teacher to write. But we definitely want students to ask in the spring so that teachers can plan. That's super, super important. And then we also think it's really important to write a thank you note. And we will remind students of this next fall. But most teachers write outside of school time, evenings, weekends. It's not something they're required to do. It's not something they're paid to do. They do it out of the goodness of their hearts and the care for the kids. And so writing a thank you note really makes a big difference. I believe I am turning it over to Mrs. Morrissey. But are there questions that we should ask first, or do you want to go for it?
Yes, just a few questions. Okay. In terms of test prep, will AMSA be offering anything this spring, or should people start looking elsewhere for test prep?
I don't know. I have asked. I will follow up again. We typically have a math and an English teacher who offer an SAT prep course within AMSA, well, after school at AMSA. And I haven't heard about whether or not they're planning to do that again. So there are a ton of different test prep resources. I would also recommend for students who aren't really sure that they want to invest a ton of money in test prep, if they connect their College Board account to Khan Academy, there are some free resources. You can take a diagnostic test and then use Khan Academy to prep for the SAT. So that can be a great way to do some studying that doesn't cost a ton of money. But I will follow up with the math and English department and then email all of you to let you know. I also see a great question. What's the value in taking the PSAT in January if you're taking the actual SAT in the spring? Agreed. I totally feel you. I think there are two things. Number one, it's an extra practice. So for students with test anxiety, just getting back in there, filling out the bubble sheets, that can be really helpful. The other reason that we decided to offer the PSAT is this is the qualifier for the National Merit Scholarship Program. So if you're a student who typically tests very well and you are hoping to achieve national merit recognition in some way, this is the qualifying test. So that's why we wanted to make sure we could offer the PSAT for you all. Now, if we can't get the PSAT off the ground in January, you can still actually use the SAT as the qualifying test. So if you're thinking about skipping the PSAT and taking the SAT, you can find more information about alternate qualification for national merit by using that test. But there's a form you have to fill out. Happy to talk with anybody about it who's interested. Is the junior class done with MCAS where their spring MCAS was canceled this past year? I don't 100% know. I think we're all kind of hoping that maybe we won't end up being required to do it. But I believe that currently, I believe the plan is for juniors to take spring MCAS this year because a couple of the tests they need to take, they technically have to take certain pass to graduate. We have a great pass rate. I think 99%, often 100% of our students pass MCAS. So I don't think it's something to really worry about. But we should have some more information soon. But we are planning to do MCAS in the spring for current juniors and then for some of our other classes as well. Couple teacher rec questions. Should teacher recs be requested specifically from the teachers and subjects that the student is interested in? Usually, but we also ask for someone for people from different disciplines. So we know that all students are going to have to write in college, even if they're studying math. So having someone from humanities may still be a great idea, even if you're interested in math or science. So it really depends. But we think relationship and performance and reflection is really, in some ways more important than specific subject. If you really want to be a physics major, but for some reason you just didn't click with that physics teacher, but your math teacher can write, all day about you, like, obviously, like, ask your math teacher. So I think I answered the other one about, yeah, I think I answered the other one, but definitely if they plan to major in computer science, for example, should they ask math versus ELA? Again, I think it's good to have a diversity of teachers because there's definitely, there's a lot of writing in both. There's a lot of humanities work that students will still have to take. So, we definitely think folks should ask widely. And then if you have an outside reference letter, those actually go directly through Common App. So they add the recommender to Common App. We actually have a video series of all kinds of things. We made a whole video series of stuff, and there is a little video about how to ask how to add an outside recommender on Common App on our senior STEM classroom. So I believe your daughter's senior. Yeah. Okie dokie. Mrs. Morrissey, want to go for it?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right, cool.
All right, so the counselor recommendation does differ a little bit from that of the teacher recommendation. The focus of our recommendations is really on the big picture. So we talk about the students' overall academic history at AMSA, the classes that they've chosen, why they've chosen, if there's any special circumstances where, maybe one particular year they wanted to take 2 AP courses, but it didn't work within their schedule. We can highlight that there was an interest there, it just that there were scheduling conflicts. We also spend part of our recommendation talking about personal qualities and characteristics, as well as the co-curriculars and community involvement, both at AMSA as well as outside of AMSA. So in order for us to really get to know your students or get to know the students in general, one of the required documents that we ask students to fill out is the counselor recommendation questionnaire. It's in Naviance. When we start junior seminar, which we'll talk about in a little bit, we do go through Naviance with all the students, show them where these surveys are within Naviance, and explain to them just the importance of filling this out. It's about 25 to 30 questions, all about the student, not only the academic piece, but what are they most proud of? What are their strengths? How would they describe themselves? What are they thinking about majoring in? So it's a great way for us as counselors to get to know the students better. And then the next step after you fill out that recommendation questionnaire in Naviance is to have a junior meeting with your counselor. These are one-on-one meetings that students go through. They'll meet with their counselor, they'll go through their junior questionnaire, as well as discuss their potential list of colleges that they're planning to apply to or thinking about applying to. We'll help go through that list and designate things as a reach, safety, or target, answer any questions that they have at that time. If a student, is more anxious than somebody else, we may talk about, where those nerves are coming from. But it's a great opportunity for us to get to know your student better and to do that one-on-one assistance within the college planning process. The other document that's great and super helpful for us as we write our letters of recommendation is the family questionnaire. This is only, I think, 6 questions, I believe, that you as the parent or guardian can fill out for us. This allows us to get a deeper look at your student. Believe it or not, in the years that we've done this, the parents typically have the ability to brag about their son or daughter more so than their actual student is bragging about themselves. So I've learned a lot of really cool things about kids that they never told me, either in their questionnaire or in our one-on-one meetings. Even students that I had known for years, that there were certain activities or things that they had been involved with throughout high school that they never even mentioned to me that their parent highlighted in their questionnaire. And it was really helpful, and it gave me a little bit more information and just a few more details that I was able to add to my letters of recommendation. So those are really important for us. Next slide. So other pieces to the application would be the transcript in the AMSA profile. We did post a link to the school profile in the chat if anybody is curious and wants to take a look at that. But basically, the transcript will cover final grades 9, 10, and 11. And then during the student's senior year, we break them down per term. So we send out a new transcript every time we post grades. So at the first term and then the mid-year, and like Ms. Driver mentioned earlier, we do recalculate GPAs at the mid-year for seniors. Our GPAs that what is the word I'm looking for? We report, that's the word I'm looking for. We report out to schools is based on a 5.0 scale, and it's our weighted GPA. Many colleges do recalculate the GPAs based off of their own specifications. So some only look at the 5 core academic subjects. Some do it based off of the major that a student's going into. So if they were, say, a computer science major, they would factor in those computer science classes. Other schools may not take those into consideration. So it's based on the individual college in terms of how they would like to recalculate those GPAs. All the classes on the transcript are designated with the appropriate level. So whether they're CP, honors, AP, or accelerated, and AMSA does not rank. So we do not report rank out to any of the schools for our students. It's a pretty common practice, especially now, to have schools that don't rank. And part of the reason why AMSA doesn't rank is because we would be doing a disservice to a lot of our students based off of if they were in the top 50% of the students at AMSA, compared to, say, the top 50% at Marlboro High School. There's a big discrepancy between GPAs of what we have at AMSA versus Marlboro. So we don't want to put any of our students at a disadvantage by ranking them. The AMSA profile, just to give you a little bit more context, does go through like the math levels. It reports out to colleges the different levels of our courses and what those mean. So it just provides context within the overall application for a college to get to know AMSA better and to understand what our curriculum looks like in the prestige of the AMSA education. Next slide. So there's different types of applications or different ways that students can apply, or different timings. The first is early decision. So this is your binding option. So if you apply early decision to a school, you are saying to that school, if you accept me, I will attend, regardless of financial aid or any other circumstances, that this is your binding option. So if your acceptance letter comes in the mail, you will withdraw all of your applications from any of the other schools that you've already applied to, and you will send your deposit in typically within a month turnaround time of when you receive that acceptance letter. As part of this process, you as the student, as well as the parent or guardian and the counselor, will need to sign a document that says that you've discussed the binding of early decision, in that if the student is accepted, they will attend. So it can be a great thing for a student that is 125% sure that this is the school that they want to attend, and also that they've looked at the financial piece of it. So they've done some of the cost calculators that are on that the financial aid website of that school, and they know that as a family, you'll be able to make that financial commitment and afford to pay the tuition for that school. It's not always it's not for everybody. We really want students to look at this seriously and realize that it is a binding agreement. And if you, just because you don't get the financial aid package that you we're hoping for doesn't mean you can necessarily get out of this agreement. So you are entering into agreement. So it is something that we really strongly want you to look at and make sure that this is really the right fit for you. Restrictive early action is non-binding, but it is still limited. So this is typically done with more of the elite or Ivy League schools, but this basically says to students that if you're going to apply to us early action, you cannot apply to any other private institutions for early action. You can, however, apply to the state schools or any state school. So for instance, if you were to apply to Harvard, they have restricted early action. So Harvard would be the only private school on your list, but you could still apply to, say, UMass Amherst, UNH, UConn, because those are all state schools. If you're accepted, you're not restricted or binded to go to that school. So you would still have until May 1st to decide whether or not you wanted to attend Harvard. Regular early action typically happens early in the fall, so anywhere from October 15th to we're seeing dates as late as December 15th. Schools have some schools have just a regular early action, some have early action 1, early action 2. Really, those 1 and 2 is just based off of the date itself. The benefits of applying for early action are you apply early, you find out typically anywhere from mid-December to mid-January. So you know earlier on in the process whether or not you've been accepted. And a lot of times, even if you're not accepted right off the bat, you can most likely will be deferred to the regular decision pool. So at that point, they would take a second look at your application. You'd be with the regular decision applicants, and they would look at second term senior grades. So it can be, there's definitely some advantages to that early action process. We really like to work with students individually in creating a plan for them of what is a good, when is a good time for those students, for your students to apply. So we really work closely with the students on making our recommendations on when we feel is the best place or best time to apply. Rolling decisions happen on basically what it says, a rolling basis. So typically there's not a specific deadline, but as a student applies and sends in all their documents, generally within 6 to 8 weeks of applying to the school, once the application's been complete, the school will make a decision and then send out their decision to the student. So they're not doing drop deadlines like your typical early decision or early action or regular decision would do. Regular decision typically happens later on in the winter. So anywhere from December 15th to up until March, April in some instances. Most of them are done by March 1st. But these are schools that are looking at the first and second term senior grades. It's a review of the entire applicant pool. Typically, decisions are sent out mid-March to beginning of April, and then again, they have until May 1st to decide whether or not they want to attend. Priority deadlines are often associated with merit money. So for instance, BU has a regular decision deadline of January 1st. However, their priority deadline for scholarship is December 1st. So those are just important things to look at as you go through the process and you start creating these big spreadsheets of when application deadlines are, is to look to see if schools have a priority deadline for, say, a merit scholarship or for an honors program, because each school has kind of different policies and procedures behind that. Next.
Okay, so before we move on to the next slide, I just want to add a few thoughts about early decision and applying to schools early. So there was a question shared in the chat, what would the advantage be for applying early to a college versus regular timing? So as Ms. Morrissey shared just a few moments ago, when you apply early, you tend to get information back earlier regarding the admission decision. So for a lot of our students who've submitted applications for November 1st and November 15th deadlines, those seniors are likely going to be hearing this month, actually in the coming couple of weeks, where they stand in those different applicant pools. So I think the main advantage is that students do get to hear back earlier. For some early action deadlines at some colleges, sometimes merit money is commonly awarded during the early action cycle. I know Fairfield University in Connecticut is an example of a school that does award a lot of merit money during early action. Early action is not binding as early decision is, so no harm in applying there. I do want to share two cautionary notes, though, around early decision. So as we heard from Mrs. Morrissey, early decision is binding. So that means if a student applies early decision and is accepted, they are going to need to attend. One of the challenges with early decision is because you have to go if you get in, you don't have the flexibility to compare financial aid packages from multiple institutions. So if you do think that financial aid is going to be a major determining factor in the college that a family ultimately chooses, it's probably a good idea to cast a wide net and avoid the early decision path and focus more on early action and regular decision schools so that in the spring you'll have a number of different financial aid packages, hopefully, to compare and contrast and find the one that is the best fit for your family. The other caution that I want to talk about regarding early decision is that when students apply early decision, colleges review the first 3 years of grades as well as first quarter grades of 12th grade. If a student is off to a rough start in school in 12th grade and they aren't earning their optimal grades, it may very well be a good idea to postpone applying to a college to regular decision and giving that student a chance to raise their grades a little bit. So just some extra thoughts around early decision.
Great, thank you so much. All right. Okay, so navigating the process. So now I'm sure many of you are in information overload, but kind of some practical things that you can start doing. As parents or guardians, we really encourage you to just really have a conversation with your student, put your student in the driver's seat and figure out where they're at right now. For some of your students, they may be already starting to put together lists. They've already done some research. They've attended a few information sessions. For others, they may not even want to discuss it right now, and that's okay. The important part is that you kind of let them steer the ship. Don't allow this process to become overwhelming and get to the point where it's causing friction within the house. We want to kind of support and guide them through the process. Also, supporting and empowering your student to make decisions and feel like they have a say in this process. We don't want you or us as counselors to overtake the process. Let them explore, let them do the research and find out, what they feel is going to be a good fit for them. Setting reasonable expectations is really important as well, both in terms of if you know that it's having your student go to school, say in California, is going to create, a huge financial strain, and you're not going to be able to fly them back and forth from school multiple times a year. Having those conversations of distance-wise, what's reasonable, also financially, what can you afford as a family? It can be a difficult conversation to have, but it really is an important one to have. Help students to own the process. So students should be the ones, communicating with the college representatives and sending emails, setting up their interview, reaching out and setting up meetings with us as counselors. And I actually can't see the end of the slide, Kate. Hold on. Is that me? Or hold on. Sorry. Also writing their essays, filling out their applications. Those should all be on the student side to really own the process. Okay. And then as families, while your student's really driving the car, I'll totally butchered that one. Good thing we're not in the cafeteria, because that would not have gotten a laugh at all. So while your kids are in the driver's seat, you as the parents are still in the car. So we want you to be mindful of the pressures of senior year, not only the academic pressure, but also the social and emotional effect. You know, there's a lot going on within school as well as in your households of this whole transition to college. So just being aware of all of the ups and downs of, you know, what could happen during senior year. And then having realistic expectations. In saying to your student that no matter what happens, no matter where they get in or don't get in, that you'll be proud of them when it's all said and done. Helping, other ways that you as a family can help is helping to coordinate and plan visits. In doing that, you know, that extra piece of if you're going to visit a college, you know, where are you going to stay? Where are you going to eat? What else is in the area to keep yourselves entertained or explore while you're on these college visits? Helping them to create a spreadsheet and ensure that there's a document that you can track everything as a family and start to list out the schools that you like, what you like or didn't like about them, what's available for virtual experiences and events. And then as a family, managing the financial aid process, filling out the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and looking at affordability, looking at the deadlines and what forms are required by each of the schools that you're going to be applying to. Like I mentioned earlier, under the counselor recommendation, filling out that family questionnaire is really, really important for us because we learn really good details about your student that they don't always share with us. And again, having that Google document that may transform, or you might end up just adding extra sheets to it throughout the process, but, you know, starting with the list of schools that your student is looking at, figuring out, you know, what pieces of each school that they like, what they don't like, and then from there, moving to the next sheet of the schools that you're going to be applying to, tracking deadlines for both admission as well as financial aid, when to submit test scores, all of that will be really helpful. Helping your student to register for standardized tests, getting them there, any supplies that they need, sending the scores, making sure that students are aware of the AMSA school policies and meeting deadlines. So as a counseling department, we do put out certain deadlines that we like students to have their recommendation forms in by, have their meetings with us during their junior year, making sure that they're marking things in Naviance. So just following up and understanding what our process is on the school side and helping to reinforce that with your student. And then helping them to track their decisions once they've actually decided where they're going to go, any supplemental materials that might need to be submitted for schools like housing forms or picking classes, or if there's any additional information that needs to be provided if a student is on a wait list. Okay, so as the counselor, our role, and I know this was a question a little bit earlier within the chat, is to help students to develop and own their list. We help to facilitate the application process. We're here as a resource for students. So if they have questions or concerns throughout the process, we write the counselor letter of recommendation. We do one for each of our students. regardless of, what their plans are for after graduation. We send out all of the materials. So all of your teacher letters of recommendation, the school profile, any additional forms or supplemental materials that are needed. We will send that, transcripts, we send all of that. We provide support to juniors and seniors through junior and senior seminars. And then we can do a whole lot more as long as students plan in advance. So we read college essays, we help with resume building, we help with interview skills. The list really goes on and on. We can really sit with students multiple times. They're not limited to just that one junior meeting. We can meet with students on a regular basis if they'd like. But all of that takes advanced planning and notice. We're in a little bit of a different situation right now in terms of you can't just drop in for a meeting. But as long as students plan ahead, we're here to help and support them. Our role as counselors is to support, so not to chase students down or badger or pressure them or micromanage them. We encourage students to really take ownership of the process, and we put a lot of emphasis on that to students, that they're the ones that are determining what their deadlines are, when they're going to apply. We can't force a student to fill out an application or sit with them and do everything that needs to get done. A majority of it has to come from within, and the students need to kind of run the process and just let us know when they need help along the way.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah.
I think the other reason that that's really important to us is because we know that a year and a half from now, most of your students, fingers crossed, COVID allowing, will be living on campus. And they will have to do things like get to class on time, fill out their housing form for next year, fill out their financial aid form. There's so much that they have to do without you and us, that we feel like this is a great time for them to begin to develop and practice those skills while they still have the safety net of you all at home and us at school to help them get there. So this is really, for us, it's also about building independence and confidence, as opposed to taking over and just doing everything for them. It's really a great opportunity for them to practice these skills, so that when you send them off next year, that they understand the importance of deadlines and all of that, so that things go well when they get there.
Thanks. Okay, so some of the topics that we will be covering during junior seminar, and I just want to preface this by saying that we are currently in the process of figuring out how we are going to run junior seminar. In years past, we've taken students from PE once a cycle to meet with them for 45 minutes. That obviously is not going to be necessarily possible. So we're working and brainstorming to figure out the best way to execute everything that we need to go over and make sure that there's nothing missing from what resources we provide to you. But essentially, we will do a class overview, let you know what's to come in the upcoming semester during your spring semester junior year, show you different things in Naviance, in particular where the questionnaire is, how to do college searches. We'll discuss SAT and ACT testing, letters of recommendations with students, how to, encouraging them and walking through what are the best teachers to pick, finding your fit, doing some of the interest surveys in Naviance, utilizing all of the college search tools, both on Naviance as well as in College Board, and then helping you to build your college list, going over the application review process, and then spending some time looking at the college essay, and the different prompts, and then do's and don'ts of writing a college essay and kind of getting you started, so that way over the summer you can really do some good work on your college essays and supplemental essays. And then reviewing resumes, talking about the importance of college visits, and email etiquette are some of the topics. Senior seminar, we cover a lot of material, and despite the challenges of being remote this year, I think we still as a group managed to cover all of these topics with students, whether it be through the actual designated senior seminar time or through the workshop that we provided to students on Mondays. So we do a lot of how-tos, just making sure that everybody knows how to utilize Naviance in the correct way, how to mark the information that we need to see once you've submitted your application, adding schools to your list, sending scores if applicable, and then talking about financial aid, scholarships, giving students time to work on their application. So when we're actually hopefully back in the building, that will be a huge part of just giving you a little bit of time during the school day to get some application work done. And then really having that direct access to us. So even though we were not in the building this year, during each of the academic workshop periods, we were with the PE classes for seniors. So we were able to touch base with them, answer any questions, talk directly with our caseload, and make sure that they were on track with whatever they needed to do during the fall for that application process. So really, you're focused right now. I know we've thrown a lot of information at you, but to kind of bring it all back together, what should you be doing now? So working on developing your college list. So through research, both in Naviance as well as the College Board is a great resource. Focusing on your schoolwork. Junior year is a huge year that colleges pay a lot of attention to. So focusing on doing well and getting strong grades. Making sure that you're participating in meaningful activities. And I know for a lot of you, that means that, some of the activities that you would have typically done in a school year, you're not able to do right now. But figuring out, are there still ways that you can participate in some of those clubs and organizations and still be able to add them to your resume? I mean, colleges are, like Ms. Driver mentioned earlier, colleges are really evaluating students based off of what they know they're able to participate in and do right now. But whatever those small things are, we want to make sure that you're still staying active in any way you can. Building relationships with your teachers to prepare them and you for asking them to write your letters of recommendation. So now is really the time to do that relationship building. I always talk to kids towards the end of their junior year, and there's always a few of them that just don't feel like their teachers know them well enough. And I think this year in particular, it's hard. You're in this virtual world. You don't have those lunchroom interactions or beginning of day interactions that you may see teachers on a regular basis. So really making an effort to get to know a teacher, have a teacher get to know you. So attending office hours, asking questions, and making those connections. Because the teachers that you're going to ask for recommendations are typically going to be your teachers from either this year or teachers that you'll have next year as seniors. So that relationship building is really, really important. As well as building the relationship with us as your counselor. We can write stronger letters of recommendation the more we get to know you. So spending the time with us, not just with your 45-minute junior appointment, but also, making the time to sit with us and chat for 15 minutes if you have questions, or going over your schedule for next year. Just different little things here and there are what kind of builds a relationship and creates rapport with us. Creating a testing plan, which I know is really difficult right now because everything is so in the air, but you know, as we get more information from SAT and ACT and when tests will be offered, creating that plan of when you're going to take those exams. Working on your resume, you can do that in Naviance. There is a resume builder feature in there, but also if, you know, there's different ways to create an activity resume. So we can talk through that if you have questions about that. And then, as I mentioned, like engaging with your counselor when picking your classes for senior year. It's not all about taking as many hard classes as possible. We want to make sure that you have a balanced schedule and that you're not overdoing it for senior year, but also at the same time, you're not also filling your classes with all electives. So we really encourage students to reach out to us and ask for our opinions and helping them to pick classes for the upcoming year. Next. All right.
Okay, so now we've got some more Q&A time.
Perfect.
We've got a few up here already. I will leave our contact information up for a minute. I realized, I'm sorry, Ms. Pop, there is totally a typo in your email. Sorry.
That's okay.
But she's on the website. So, and the same conventions should apply.
Well,
okay.
it's basically the website. I mean, the email is accurate except the dot in front of AMSACs, right?
Exactly. Yes.
It's
so
otherwise accurate.
Just don't write that down. So, do we have an example of a family tracking sheet we can use? Yes. We have a copy we can send to you. I've put together a delightful, slightly terrifying list of things that I'm now going to send all of you, which I'll work on over the next few days. Hopefully get out to you by Friday, if not Friday, early next week. When is the college essay prompt released? Typically sometime in the winter. I don't know if they've officially announced Common App for next year. Ms. Pop, do you know?
No, it usually comes out in February, around February or early March. So we don't know yet what it will be for the next cycle. Yeah. But what is encouraging is they've kept the questions the same for about the last 3 years. So when they do make changes, it's usually just an adjustment to 1 to 2 questions. I don't think we're going to be seeing an overhaul of all 7 prompts if we see any changes at all.
Yeah. And there's usually some sort of like essay of your choice or essay about something important option of some sort that like you could probably fit almost any essay into that little box. How should note?
I'm sorry, Ms. Driver. On that note, I just wanted to say, while there isn't a lot of variation year to year in the Common App personal statement prompts, there is a lot of variation year to year in the college's supplemental essay questions. So that's why it's a good idea to wait until August 1st, 2021 to start working on supplemental essay questions for your applications. Some colleges will post those essay prompts in July, but the prompts that are available now on the current version of the Common App may not be the ones that you'll be required to complete as seniors.
Awesome. This is a great question, and it's a big question. How should students plan for MCAS, PSAT, AP tests, and the SATs this spring as well as classwork? I know. So here's what I would say. MCAS, I would not spend any time prepping for MCAS. We do a lot of MCAS prep in class. Teachers are very aware. I'm part of the department chair group. Like, we're keeping an eye on MCAS, and they're already starting to talk about how they would work on making sure that students are ready for MCAS in class if they have to do it this year. So I wouldn't necessarily spend any time outside of school on MCAS. Again, AP tests, I think keep doing your coursework. Our teachers are doing their very, very, very best to get students ready for the AP test. So continuing to keep pace with your teachers in class and doing what they're asking you to do is important. That leaves sort of PSAT and SAT. I think you have to look at your capacity as a student. Do you think do you have time or do you not? if you're a student who maybe is usually an athlete and isn't doing sports and won't be doing them this winter, like you may find that you do actually have a small window of time that you could devote to a prep course or something. But if you're somebody who tests have always been really hard for you, I'm not sure if I would, first of all, I would rather talk about this individually with each student because I think this answer is different for every kid. But, if you're a student who historically hasn't tested super well, but you do really well in school, maybe test optional is the way to go, and that you don't sink a bunch of time into, studying for those tests. Just do what you can, do your best. Continuing to reading books at a high level is one of the best ways to continue to develop your vocabulary. Continuing to do well in your math class. Our math classes typically prepare students really well for the SAT. So I don't think I would let the classwork go and just start studying for the SAT 10 hours a week. I think adding a thoughtful amount of SAT and PSAT prep to one schedule is probably the way to go. But I really think you have to ask yourself, what do I have capacity for? What am I hoping for? What kinds of schools am I looking at? And how much will test scores be considered there or not? Because that's really the question that I think is just starting to come up with colleges as they look to next year. So I'm not sure that I answered that one super well. If anyone else on the counseling side has anything else to add to that, it's a great question and a really tough one.
I think just, to the point that we made earlier in terms of really focusing on your junior year grades. I mean, that really in and of itself is what the schools are going to be looking at and considering as they review your application. Test scores are a small portion of it, but the overall strength of your curriculum, the classes that you've taken, how you've done are a better indication and reflection of who you are as a student rather than just the SAT or ACT. And in terms of AP prep, like Ms. Driver said, your teachers are doing a fantastic job of prepping you for that exam. And yes, there'll be some obviously studying and preparation right before the test, but I think in a majority of your cases, you're taking practice tests constantly in class and you're having those review sessions that, it's going to depend on the student, but over studying and putting too much emphasis on those actual scores and grades is the wrong focus. We really want you to be focusing on what's happening in the day-to-day and excelling in the classes that you have, rather than worrying about the exams, because that's just a small piece of the overall application. And in many instances, the colleges don't actually see your AP scores. You would be submitting those after you've been accepted to a school, once you know where you're attending, and they would be reviewing them in order to give you college credit for those particular exams. So there's less emphasis on how you did on the exam versus, what did you get for a grade within that class?
Yeah. And again, I think that there's a lot more flexibility and variability, and this pandemic has impacted many people in many different ways, and not everyone is, on top of their game right now in terms of academics, and school is certainly, important, and we can't do everything perfectly all the time. How will students be able to ask senior teachers for recommendations in the spring if they don't know which teachers they will have? That's a great question. We typically have some sense of who's teaching what. So sometimes students will know that they're going to have another year of AP, or they're going to take AP French, and we know who that's going to be. So there are some places where we do already know who those teachers are. Otherwise, again, we look for relationship junior year, or someone who we anticipate that they'll be studying with during their senior year if everything works out. That's a great question. There was another statement that was awesome. And the statement was that, I should have kept it up so I can write it or read it. I'm learning how to use this, but okay, statement. My eldest former graduate of AMSA Grad school had a great experience starting his essay over the summer and submitting his essay as a summer assignment. It was great. He didn't procrastinate. His English teacher focused on these essays at the beginning of the school year, so he was all set when it was a time to apply to colleges. Yes, we love that. We strongly recommend that students write a draft of their essay over the summer. Some of our English teachers, our non-AP English teachers, do have it as a summer assignment, which is awesome, and we love that. Folks who are in the AP classes, it's not a summer assignment typically for them, and so we would strongly recommend that they do it. Last year we, registered all of our students for a college essay workshop that was a week-long kind of boot camp from this person called the College Essay Guy. He has some wonderful resources that we really like, and we typically use when we're in the building. So we'll be sending out some prep work that students can do either later this spring or over the summer to have a draft of their essay. We had a couple of other questions in the document that were from before. I think we've covered most of this, but I'm just taking a spin through the document. I think there were some specific questions about, if my student is planning to study this, any specific advice I should be aware of. And we would definitely recommend that your student or you as a parent, reach out and talk to the counselor about the situation so that we can make sure that we're giving you, really personalized advice. We've been this year, as we've worked with students, we've tried to make sure that the time we spend with students is really personalized. So we put together a lot of videos that we sent out about how to use Common App, how to use Naviance, because I have no specialness about how to use Common App. There's nothing about that you can't Google and find. So we tried to give students resources so that they could do that work. And then when we had time with them one-on-one, we could really talk about their essay, their application, not, how do I add X college in Naviance? And so we would definitely, encourage your students to take advantage of us in the same way. What can we do for you to help you get where you want to go? What do we offer as a person? And I think those are the kinds of questions that are really best asked and answered one-on-one.